Hello, class. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 8, Assumptions, from your text, Elements of Argument, Text and a Reader. Starting on page 226, the chapter begins with the definition of what a warrant or assumption is. Basically, it's a largely held cultural belief or value, either steeped in morals or religion or some other main source, that is an ideal or belief that your audience possibly already holds. Now, the advantage of understanding warrants is that the more it can tie them believably and persuasively to your argument, the more it helps build a bridge between you and your audience, because they can then see, like, well, if this argument supports ideals I already have, they're closer to agreeing with you already based on that. So it allows you then to reach out to your audience in a way that they already understand and accept based on the beliefs they already have. Now, the important thing to remember with warrants is to make sure that they logistically and actually do tie to your topic. If they don't actually link to your argument in some meaningful way, then you do not want to use that warrant, because your audience will feel you're somehow trying to cheat or trick them in some way. And that will then destroy any trust you built with them over the time of your essay. So it's very important to make sure whatever warrants you do use them if they genuinely and reasonably link to your topic in some meaningful way, and clearly explain that link, either directly or indirectly, through your evidence or somewhere else in your argument. Now, turning in your chapter 8 to page 231, it starts to show you a rough diagram of how to tie your argument, evidence, and assumptions or warrants together. It shows you basically your support, which is your evidence, that ties to your warrant or assumption, and those combined link to your claim, your thesis, your main argument. This is a good way to help you kind of see then how the different parts of your argument start to build and link to each other, and all tie back to the thesis you state in your introduction. Now, don't worry about trying to find a warrant for your argument. It might come up to you on its own as you do your evidence research and think about what is you're trying to prove, what larger ideas or kind of audience would this matter to the most, or which ones will have more of a trouble or difficult time trying to convince them why. The more you think about that as you work through your planning of your essay and your outlines or drafts, the more you'll figure out what the warrant is, or it'll come up in your evidence as you're doing your research for your topic or thinking about your topic, your own ideas about what it is you're arguing. Let's see. All right, now we're looking at some examples of essays that deal with direct warrants to help build their case. On page 235, one of the first sample essays is called Don't Stop Frisking by Terry Eastland. And in this essay, he starts off by first defining what stop and frisk is, where he says, since the early 90s, the New York Police Department has used a crime prevention strategy that it calls stop, question, and frisk. Accordingly, officers stop and question a person based on reasonable suspicion and sometimes pat down the clothing of the individual to ensure that he is not armed. The department credits the strategy in large part for the huge declines in murder and major crimes over 2 decades in what is now the nation's safest big city. But the liberal opposition to stop, question, and frisk has been fighting back, and last week, federal district judge Shira A. Sheedlin declared the NYPD's use of the strategy unconstitutional and ordered a set of remedies whose implications is to be overseen by an independent monitor she has appointed. He goes on to reference one of the warrants in the argument is that opposers argue that the judge is trying to protect people's rights, that she sees this as a clash between the personal rights of citizens to not be harassed or unreasonably questioned or searched by police. That's kind of a larger ethical idea, a conflict between that and the other ethics and values of public safety. Those are the main kind of conflicting ethical points the article addresses. And Eastland argues in favor that stop and frisk actually is effective, and he tries to argue that despite some problems that might arise because of its use, it's more about improving how it's used rather than scrapping the program altogether. That's the kind of larger argument he's trying to make here in his essay. He goes on page 236, where he describes why it's opposed, and previous cases that tie to like supporting why it was opposed in the first place. He questions some of the testimony used in this case, that despite the number of people that on record supposedly opposed this, or that they couldn't find enough witnesses to speak in court about this. And he kind of points this out to show that, well, if there was such a legitimate case of abuse of this, they should have more proof from citizens to back it up. So it shows he's starting to question, try and throw doubt onto why the case against this as being a violation of citizens' rights doesn't have enough proof to back that up to make that kind of claim. Then he goes on to his thesis on page 237, top of the page, where he says, but her assessments, referring to the judge, of relevant law and how she looked for it, in a case of such importance to not just New York City, but in municipalities across the country, merits appellate review. What he means here basically is that he disagrees with the judge's decision, and it should be reevaluated, especially because this will have far-reaching impacts, not just in New York City, but across the U.S. as a whole, which also shows, again, why this matters so much. And he argues this has to be examined further and not just stopped at this new ruling. All right, then he goes on further to try and point out one of the issues is racial profiling, which this case brought up. In the middle page, 237, paragraph 9. He says, in concluding that NYPD was guilty of, quote, indirect racial profiling, Sheenan made much of one police chief's testimony that officers are to focus their reasonable suspicion-based stops on, quote, the right people, citing in more than a dozen times, but whenever she used those words in context, could interest the appeals court. So could her analysis of competing statistical models, especially since she seems at times to embrace the dubious notion that the racial Terry stop rates in a given community should be comparable to the percentage by race of the people who live in that community. Judge Sheenan emphasized through Floyd that her mandate was to judge the constitutionality of the policy as carried out, not its effectiveness. Evidently, constitutionality in the context at hand may not ever take into account the first imperative of government, which is to ensure the safety of the citizens. Judge's determination to regulate the NYPD through ambitious reforms and monitor reporting to her may result in less safe streets in the poor minority communities where crime once thrived and where stop, question, frisk has more often been employed. That is why an appeal is necessary to determine which so much weighing in the balance whether the judge's decision to correct is correct or not. This is where he goes into the whole question, like, well, there has to be more analysis of this because of the record he argues and tries to cite in his essay of this working. That because it has been effective, it shouldn't just be immediately stopped because of questions of how effective it is. Rather, this goes more towards the idea of making it better instead of just stopping altogether because of the possibility to not only keep working, but even work better than it is if it is improved in some way. All right, then it shows a breakdown of his argument on page 238. It shows his claim that the decision should be overruled, that stop and frisk should be reinstituted, his support current policy is effective and actually works, his implied warrant, effectiveness of policy is more important than its constitutionality. So his larger kind of point he's making here is that if it's effective and it works, if it stops crime, that's worth even possibly infringing on some constitutional rights, and that idea has to be examined further to even prove that. So it shows this two-part strategy. One is trying to show enough evidence that it is unconstitutional or it's being greatly abused on a massive scale. And two, that because it is effective in stopping crime, the ethical value of protecting the public is more important than the possible violation of constitutional rights for one individual or a small amount of individuals. That it's a risk, but it's worth it for the benefits that have been gained and could be gained further if we keep going with it. All right, the next essay we're going to look at is the one called The Case for Torture by Michael Levin on page 239. And his overall argument here is a good example of claim of policy, which we discussed several chapters ago, which is an argument that tries to support changing a rule or a law and gives reasons to why it would be more effective or help resolve an issue or problem. He goes into this in paragraph 2 on page 239. Levin writes, I believe this attitude is unwise. There are situations in which torture is not merely permissible, but morally mandatory. So it shows how he already sets up his ethical standpoint, that he sees torture as not automatically being scrapped and never used, but that in some situations he argues it can be used as an effective tool to gain valuable information. So he makes that clear, that moral stance up front, because that's the basis for his whole essay. So it's a good example of why he has to be very clear on what his ethical position is in order to build his policy from that and ties all his evidence from that point forward in the rest of his essay. All right, it goes on from there. He argues that on page 240, gives examples of how the price of hurting one person to save others is more important. He argues that if it stops terrorism, especially in the scenario of a ticking time bomb situation where there's an impending explosion or attack and a suspect who is likely or definitely involved, they could have information to stop it, should be tortured for this. Now, the problem here is the examples that he identifies, these scenarios are largely hypothetical. And the reason why it's a problem is because hypothetical situations, while some could be well thought out and make sense, haven't actually happened yet. So it's hard to know if it really would happen the way he thinks it is. And because he can't really show the physical proof, actual cases of terrorism investigations or methods by CIA or other operatives or agencies to stop terrorism that have used torture successfully, he can't really build his argument based just on hypotheticals. And that's largely where his argument falls apart, is weakened, because while he does try and build it on ethical points that saving many is worth the suffering of a few, especially those who are willing to do harm to others and will even die trying to, he doesn't really show enough physical proof of real cases that could show that. And that's where his argument starts to fall apart or gets damaged. All right. So overall for Chapter 8, the main thing to remember here is that when you work on your own essay topics, whether it's for Essay 1 or the other ones, think about what larger ideals or beliefs that this ties into for the audience, and they're part of the argument itself that you're making. The more you understand this, the more you understand what kind of ethical evidence you'll need, and what other larger ideas you might be able to build from to help support your own argument and weave your own evidence and your own ideas to make your argument stronger. All right, that concludes Chapter 8. All right, we will see you in the next video in 4 future chapters. All right, have a good day. Bye.